All right, so today we're diving into continental feminism.
Ooh, that sounds pretty niche.
Well, yeah, it is a specific area, but it's got some really interesting ideas.
Hmm.
And it might be broader than you think at first. So you hear continental and you might think like geography, right?
Huh?
Continents.
Yeah, like a map or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in philosophy, it's more about a way of thinking, a whole tradition, really.
Hmm.
It draws on these thinkers and ideas from the European philosophical scene, but it's not just about being from
It's
Europe.
like a shared intellectual vibe, right?
Exactly. It's less about the where and more about the how. Like what kinds of questions are we asking and what tools are we using to answer them?
Right, because tools matter. Like if all you've got is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail.
Perfect analogy. So
Right.
in the world of philosophy, there's this distinction between continental and analytic traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And they both have their strengths, their ways of approaching problems. But continental philosophy, it tends to dig into these really big, messy questions about existence, meaning, power, all that good stuff.
The stuff that keeps you up at night.
Exactly. And the continental label itself, it
Mhm.
mostly refers to these 19th and 20th century thinkers from mainland Europe. But as we were prepping for this deep dive, I found this great point in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. They said it's less a strict geographical boundary and more like an imagined community. A group of people who share this certain set of intellectual touchstones and ways of thinking.
Which is so interesting, right? Because it's not like you have to have a European passport to participate in continental philosophy. It's about the ideas, the approach.
Totally. And because we're focusing on continental feminism, things get even more interesting. We're talking about how those big philosophical questions get tangled up with issues of gender, power, identity, and all the complexities that come with those.
Yeah, because like you can't just tack feminism onto an existing philosophical system and call it a day. You got to really wrestle with it, see how it changes things, maybe even break some stuff in the process.
Exactly. And that's what I love about the continental feminist thinkers. They're not afraid to get their hands dirty,
Yeah.
to question everything, and to propose new ways of seeing the world.
They're like the philosophical rebels.
I love that. So how does this continental feminism actually work? Like, what are they doing?
Well, for one, they're looking back at some of those classic European philosophers, but with a critical eye, they're asking, hey, did these guys even consider women's experiences, or were they just assuming that men's experiences were universal?
Which is such a crucial question, right? Like, whose voices are being centered and whose are being silenced?
Exactly. And that's where those continental frameworks we talked about come in phenomenology, existentialism, psychoanalysis, all that jazz. They become tools for understanding how gender and power operate in a really nuanced way.
Can you give some examples of those tools in action? Like, how does phenomenology help us think about feminist issues?
Sure. So phenomenology is all about understanding lived experience, right? Like, what's it actually like to exist in the world as a woman, as a person of color, as someone who defies those traditional categories? And it's not just about describing those experiences, it's about analyzing the structures and systems that shape them.
So, like, instead of just saying, oh, women are often told to smile more, phenomenology helps us ask, why is that? What are the underlying power dynamics at play there?
Exactly. And existentialism, that focuses on freedom and responsibility, and it asks, how are women's choices constrained? How do they navigate a world that often denies them agency?
And then psychoanalysis comes in with its focus on the unconscious, right?
Hmm.
And that can be helpful for understanding how those deep-seated beliefs about gender get internalized, how they play out in our relationships and our sense of self.
Yeah, it's like sometimes we're not even aware of the ways we've been conditioned to think about gender, but psychoanalysis can help us unpack that.
Right. And then you've got deconstruction, which is this whole other thing.
Hmm.
It's like taking language apart, seeing how it reinforces those binary categories like male, female, good, bad, rational, emotional, and then figuring out how to disrupt those binaries.
It's like saying, hold on, why are these categories even seen as opposites, and who benefits from that opposition?
Totally. And then there's genealogy, which is about tracing how power dynamics have shifted and changed over time. Like, how did we even get to this point where certain ideas about gender are seen as natural or inevitable?
And then you've got critical theory, which is like the big picture stuff. It's about analyzing those huge, complex systems of power, like capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, and how they all intersect and reinforce each other.
So it's not just about understanding individual experiences of gender, it's about seeing how those experiences are shaped by these larger forces, right?
Absolutely. And that's what makes continental feminism so powerful. It gives you this whole toolbox for understanding how gender operates on so many different levels.
Right. And speaking of tools, it seems like one of the key moves in continental feminism is to re-examine the philosophical canon itself.
Yeah.
Like, who gets to be considered a great thinker and what ideas are considered worth studying?
Oh, yeah, that's huge. They're not just accepting the traditional lineup of mostly white European men. They're saying, hey, there are tons of other voices out there that have been ignored or marginalized, and we need to listen to them.
And that's where this idea of a transcontinental turn comes in, right?
Exactly. It's this push to move beyond that Eurocentric focus and to recognize the global diversity of feminist thought. Like, there are amazing feminist philosophers and activists in Asia, Africa, Latin America, all over the place.
And their ideas are just as important, just as insightful.
Absolutely. And it's not just about geography either. It's
Yeah.
about recognizing the ways that feminist thought flows across different disciplines, too. Like, you can't just silo off philosophy from literature or history or sociology.
It's all connected. And that brings us back to our deep dive today. We're looking at continental feminism as this really rich, complex tapestry that includes feminist uses of all those continental schools of thought phenomenology, existentialism, psychoanalysis, the whole works. But we're also looking at how those frameworks are being challenged and expanded by Black feminists, post- and decolonial feminists, women of color feminists, Asian American feminists, trans feminists, and queer feminists.
Basically, we're looking at how continental feminism is becoming more inclusive, more intersectional, and more globally aware.
And that's super exciting, right? Like, it means that the field is constantly evolving, constantly being pushed in new directions.
Totally. And that's one of the things I love about studying philosophy. It's not just about memorizing old ideas, it's about engaging with them critically and seeing how they can be used to understand our world and make it a better place.
So let's get into some of the nitty-gritty details, shall we? Like, what are some of the key concepts and arguments that emerge from this whole continental feminist project?
Okay, so one of the biggest through lines is this idea that the norms and categories we use to understand gender, they're not neutral, they're not universal. They're products of specific historical and cultural contexts, often rooted in Western thought and often serving to reinforce existing power structures.
Right, so it's not just about saying men and women are different, therefore.
It's about asking, how did we even come to understand men and women in this particular way, and who benefits from that understanding?
Exactly. And that's where concepts like patriarchy and kyriarchy come in, right?
Yeah.
They help us see how power operates not just in terms of individual men oppressing individual women, but as these larger systemic forces.
Yeah, and they help us see how those systems intersect with other forms of oppression, like racism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism.
So it's about understanding how all these different forms of oppression are interconnected, how they all feed into each other.
And that's where the concept of intersectionality comes in. It's this idea that we can't just analyze gender in isolation. We have to look at how it intersects with race, class, sexuality, disability, all of those factors.
And that's such a crucial insight, right? Because it means that even within the category of women, there's a huge diversity of experiences and perspectives.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to center the voices of those who have been most marginalized, because they often have the clearest view of how these systems of power actually operate.
So we've talked a lot about power, but what about agency? Like, how do continental feminists think about women's ability to act in the world, to shape their own destinies?
Well, this is where things get really interesting, because continental feminism doesn't shy away from the ways that women's agency is often constrained, often limited. But it also recognizes that even within those limitations, there are still possibilities for resistance, for creativity, for carving out spaces of freedom.
So it's not this naive idea that women can just pull themselves up by their bootstraps and overcome oppression.
No, it's a much more nuanced understanding of how power operates and how even small acts of resistance can have a ripple effect.
And that's where ideas like subversion and transgression come in, right?
Yeah.
Like finding ways to challenge the dominant narratives, to disrupt the status quo, even if it's in subtle ways.
Yeah, and it's not always about grand gestures either. Sometimes it's about those everyday acts of defiance, those little cracks in the system where something new can emerge.
So like wearing clothes that don't conform to gender norms, or speaking out against sexism in your workplace, or choosing to have a different kind of family structure than what society expects. Those are all forms of resistance, right?
Absolutely. And those acts, even though they might seem small, they can help to chip away at those larger systems of power.
And that's why representation matters too, right? Like seeing other women who are challenging those norms, who are living their lives on their own terms, that can be so inspiring and empowering.
Totally. It's like when you see someone else doing something that you thought was impossible, it opens up possibilities for you too.
Okay, so we've talked about power, agency, resistance.
Yeah.
What about embodiment? Like, how does continental feminism approach the relationship between our minds and our bodies?
Oh, that's a huge one. Because so much of Western philosophy has been about privileging the mind over the body, seeing the body as this kind of messy, irrational thing that gets in the way of pure thought.
Right, like the classic image of the philosopher in his ivory tower, detached from the world and all its bodily concern.
Exactly. But continental feminism is all about saying, hold on, the body is not just this vessel for the mind, it's an integral part of who we are, how we experience the world, and how we understand ourselves.
And that's especially true for women, right? Like, our bodies are often seen as objects to be controlled, to be gazed upon, to be regulated.
Absolutely. And that's why continental feminists are so interested in exploring the lived experience of embodiment. Like, what's it actually like to exist in a female body, in a body that's been subjected to all these social and cultural pressures?
And this is where those continental frameworks like phenomenology and psychoanalysis come in handy again, right? They give us tools for understanding the complex relationship between our bodies, our emotions, and our sense of self.
Yeah, phenomenology helps us see how the body is not just an object in the world, it's the very ground of our experience. Like, we are our bodies, in a sense.
And psychoanalysis helps us understand how those early childhood experiences, those messages we receive about our bodies, how they get internalized and shape our sense of self.
And then you've got thinkers like Judith Butler who are using those frameworks to really deconstruct the very idea of sex and gender, showing how they're not these natural biological categories, but are actually performative, meaning they're created through our repeated actions and interactions.
So it's not just about challenging the ways that women's bodies are treated, it's about challenging the very categories of woman and man themselves.
Exactly. And that's where things start to get really radical and really exciting.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Power, agency, embodiment, the challenge to traditional categories.
Yeah.
What are some of the other key themes that emerge from continental feminism?
Well, one that I find really fascinating is the focus on language. Like, how do the words we use, the stories we tell, how do they shape our understanding of gender and power?
Right, because language isn't neutral, is it? It carries all these assumptions and biases.
And continental feminists are really good at unpacking that. Like, they'll analyze a philosophical text or a piece of literature and show how the language itself is doing a lot of the work of reinforcing those traditional gender roles.
And that can be really eye-opening, right? Like suddenly you start to see how the things we say and hear, they're not just innocent words, they're actually shaping the way we think.
Totally. And that's why continental feminists are so interested in finding new ways of speaking, new ways of telling stories that can challenge those dominant narratives.
And that connects to this idea of re-narrating or reimagining, right? Like
Yeah.
not just critiquing the existing stories, but actively creating new ones that center different perspectives, different experiences.
Yeah, and that's where things get really creative and really
So
powerful.
it's not just about tearing down the old, it's about building something new in its place.
Absolutely. And that's what I find so hopeful about continental feminism. It's not just about pointing out the problems, it's about offering possibilities for change.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's take a step back and think about the impact of all this. Like, how has continental feminism influenced the wider world beyond the realm of academia?
Well, for one, it's had a huge impact on other fields like literary criticism, art history, sociology, even psychology. You see those continental feminist ideas popping up everywhere.
And it's not just about theory either, it's about activism too. Like, those continental feminist insights have helped to fuel movements for social justice, for gender equality, for LGBTQ plus rights.
And it's had a real impact on people's lives, too. Like, there are countless individuals who have found strength and validation in those continental feminist ideas.
And that's what's so amazing about it. It's
Yeah.
not just this abstract intellectual exercise, it's about making a real difference in the world.
And that's something I think we can all get behind, right?
Absolutely. So one last thought for our listeners. Remember that continental feminism isn't a finished product. It's an ongoing conversation, a process of constant questioning and reevaluation. And that's what makes it so exciting, because it means there's always more to learn, more to discover, and more to do.
And we can all be a part of that conversation regardless of our background or our expertise.
Exactly. So keep reading, keep thinking, keep challenging those norms, and let's see where this whole continental feminist project takes us next.
To the future.
Onward.
And upward.
Okay, we are officially off the rails, but I love it. Thanks for listening.
And thinking.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Bye.
Bye.